What was the real message that Democrats in Wisconsin sent this week?
There are two messages, and they're connected. The first is that Democrats, like most voters in general, want change. They feel like the country's not working for them. They feel like the economy's not working for them. They want a government that responds to that, and they want to win. They want to win in November. They know you can't have change unless you have someone who wins the general election. And they found someone in David Crowley who's going to do both of those two things. But the big story to me is the huge level of Democratic engagement and turnout in Wisconsin and in Michigan. Gigantic leap up from 2018, which was a very intensive year. Republican turnout went down from 2018. There were like more than 50% more Democrats voting in this primary than Republicans. And I think what you're seeing across the board is a level of kind of burgeoning energy that's going to erupt into Democratic victories at every level of the ballot, from House races to state legislature to the Wisconsin governor's race, where David Crowley is going to beat Tom Tiffany this November.
Let's talk about Tom Tiffany for a moment. I actually spoke with a Republican in your state, in Congressman Brian Stile, who chairs the House Admin Committee, and he's a pretty frequent voice here on Bloomberg, talking about matters financial and otherwise. When we got down to politics in your state, though, he was not moved by this Crowley versus Hong dynamic. His point was they're the same person. Ben, listen to what he said.
People started to understand what Francesca Hong stands for. She became less popular. I think now people are going to focus in on David Crowley and actually recognize that they share many of the same policy goals. David Crowley raised taxes as he was county executive, in particular on the sales tax. You had Francesca Hong, who wanted to make Wisconsin the highest taxed state in the country. You have a series of mismanagement in Milwaukee County by David Crowley. We can't allow that type of mismanagement in Washington.
So that's the Republican campaign against Crowley. Brian Stile was with Tom Tiffany the night before at his victory party. How do you run against that?
Well, Brian Stile and Tom Tiffany have the same problem, as well as Derek Van Orden in Wisconsin. They all voted to take $1 trillion away from healthcare from Americans in order to fund tax cuts for the very wealthy. In Wisconsin, hundreds of thousands of people are losing their health insurance coverage because they can't afford the premiums after these Republican cuts that Tom Tiffany and Brian Stile both voted for. David Crowley, like pretty much every Democrat and the vast majority of people in the state, they want to expand Medicaid in Wisconsin. We're one of only 10 states that hasn't done that. They want to make sure that childcare is more affordable for people. They want to make sure people can get housing, which is something that David Crowley has done so well in Milwaukee County. They have the lowest rate of unhoused homelessness in Milwaukee of any major county in the United States of America. This is a guy who addressed a budget crisis, who made sure that law enforcement and public services got funding, not just in Wisconsin, but across the state by getting a bipartisan deal through the state legislature. Brian Stile and the GOP don't have an answer for that. They're running from the fact that they've made life more expensive for working people in our state, which is politically toxic in a year of affordability concerns.
Well, Tom Tiffany talked about something else, voted for something else, Ben, and that was to overturn the 2020 presidential election. If he won here, he would be the first person who cast that vote to win the governorship in a major swing state like yours. I'm surprised you didn't reach for that first. Is that not part of your message to Wisconsin voters?
Absolutely. It's an urgent and it's an important message. I will say we're going to start with affordability and the concerns of folks who might not really want to tune in to the differences between Democrats and Republicans, but know that they're taking it in the pocketbook. Once we cover that, it's important to note that Tom Tiffany was part of a coup to overturn American democracy in 2020. If he's in charge of Wisconsin's government, he will be in charge of certifying the next presidential election. And we can't afford the risk of someone who tried to rip away the people's voice in 2020 to potentially try to nullify the next presidential race. With David Crowley, you have someone who, as county executive, has presided in his leadership role over multiple successful, free and fair elections where people from both parties have won. That is the way American democracy is supposed to work. So there are national stakes for democracy in also the U.S. Senate race and House maps. There's also stakes for people's pocketbooks, even if they hate politics, and we want to make sure voters know about both of those.
Let's widen widen the aperture here, because there are questions about whether the DSA insurgency is overstated. A week earlier, we were talking about Abdul El-Sayed and the remarkable margin in which he beat Congresswoman Haley Stevens with. Very different scenario here, as he enjoyed the backing of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC. We didn't see that with Francesca Hong. To what extent is this a national trend, Ben, or a statewide one?
I think that these are very different races. And as much as the kind of national lens is pitting two factions against each other, here in Wisconsin, David Crowley is a pragmatic progressive. He is somebody who has very clear positions about raising the minimum wage, addressing economic concerns that people have. And also, he's very focused on how you bring folks together to actually pass laws. I think that for Wisconsin voters, you can see the unity immediately after the primary, with Francesca Hong and two other candidates in the primary joining David Crowley. They're all going to barnstorm the state because they all know the stakes in beating Tom Tiffany this fall for people's pocketbooks and for democracy itself.
Well, when you look more broadly at the map, to what extent will Democratic Socialists be carrying the torch here for the party? Everyone in my business is trying to connect the dots. From Mamdani in New York, straight through Michigan, even Texas, we saw this trend bubble up, and to Colorado. Ben, is this the theme of this election, or is that push and pull between moderates and progressives going to be an asset in what we all refer to as a Big Ten party?
I think the most striking thing in this election cycle is that Democrats have a shot to win in states that Trump carried by double digits. Yeah. I'm talking about Rob Sand and Josh Turek in Iowa and House races and the Attorney General's race. In Alaska, Mary Peltola and the Democrats in the House race. We've got a shot in Texas. We've got a shot in North Carolina, Ohio, all these different places. In Wisconsin, we're a 50-50 purple state. And we've got David Crowley, who's a uniter for the broad spectrum of Democrats, who can carry Democrats to victory in state legislative districts that Trump won. And that means there's a possibility of a Democratic trifecta in 2026. As much as it's fun to talk about kind of intra-Democratic squabbling, often most prominent in the bluest parts of the country, the big question is who has majority control of state legislative chambers and congressional chambers. And all those things are on the table for Democrats in 2026.
Your track record, and we should note that you ran the Democratic Party in Wisconsin from 2019 to 2025, pretty important period of time, when you won 7 of the past 10 statewide races. And of course, the state, as you mentioned, considered to be 50-50. I don't know is Wisconsin purple now? I guess we call it, but it brings us to your book. This is the plan and the roadmap that you put in place in Madison. How do you make that a national strategy?
Well, the first core insight is that it's often the least kind of publicized races that have the biggest effect on the path for American democracy. I opened the book with Elon Musk coming to Wisconsin, standing on a stage in Green Bay, putting on a cheese head and saying that our state Supreme Court race would affect the entire destiny of humanity. And of course, we blew him and his candidate out of the water by 10 percentage points 2 days later. But he's kind of right. The state Supreme Court races, state legislative races, they wind up writing the rules that affect how presidents are elected, how congressional majorities are determined. And those are the super low profile, super high impact races across the country in 2026 that will shape the long-term future. The current moment of political crisis started not when Trump descended the golden escalator, but when Republicans swept state houses in 2010, including Wisconsin's, and then redrew congressional maps and started kind of rigging the system to make sure they'd never lose power. We're unwinding that in my state. In my book, I argue for a strategy in each state to unrig the political system and then ladder up to national reforms like term limits on the U.S. Supreme Court that could help to create a free and fair democracy for everyone. This is a battle where if you throw some money, some volunteer time into a state legislative race near you, that could be the tipping point thing that really changes the whole future of American politics. And to know that roadmap is to have far more power as an individual, as a group of folks, than you would otherwise.